Wow, it has been a busy week for me, for cameras, for drones. There's a lot that's been going on, and I thought I owed it to you to put together a weekend video. I'm gonna kind of talk openly, candidly about my thoughts, obviously, on the new Lumix S1 Mark II announcement, as well as the S1 Mark II-E, as well as the new Lumix 24-60 f2.8 lens. We're gonna talk a little bit about the DJI Mavic 4 and just my candid, open, honest reactions to these product launches. But before we get started, like this video, hit the subscribe button and consider joining the channel. Channel members get exclusive access to Filmmaker Alchemy, behind the scenes lessons and insights on the business of video production. Learn how to turn your content into gold. There's a lot to unpack here. So this video is going to be kind of free flowing, just my stream of consciousness, thoughts, feelings, vibes on the S1 Mark II. That's the one I'm most excited for. And spoilers, I am excited for it, but there's some things that give me a little bit of pause, a little hesitation. I'm less enthusiastic about the S1 Mark II-E. That doesn't really seem like the camera for me. Maybe it's for someone out there, but I think it's more of a niche camera, as well as the lens, the 24-60. We're going to talk about a lot about that. But this is kind of open. It's just free flowing, stream of consciousness, get something out there for you to consume over this weekend. Listen to my thoughts openly. There's a lot more videos that I'm going to put together. Obviously, I have not touched any of these products. I can only give you my thoughts as I'm kind of digesting it all by watching other people's reviews, whatever you want to call them, when basically influencers, YouTubers get access to a pre-release, pre-production camera model. They can obviously talk about it, all the features, all the marketing, all the bells and whistles. Here's why it's so great. But it's also kind of hard to decipher how much of that, is the whole truth of these cameras. I've always said, really you should wait to get your hands on it yourself. And that's kind of where I'm at. I don't want to rush in buying something that is maybe going to end up being a little bit of regret, buyer's remorse, let's say, if it doesn't actually live up to my expectations, my needs, my demands. And the thing is, we're all different. Some people prioritize photography. Some people prioritize cinematography. Some people prioritize videography. There's so many ways that you can use these hybrid cameras that it really comes down to, is it the right tool for you? Because it's not even necessarily the right tool for the job. That's the candid way we speak, but really the right tool for you. There's plenty of other videos out there talking about the S1 Mark II. You've probably seen them already. I'm going to put together some responses coming out next week as we kind of unpack what other people have said, how it matches with other cameras of the past, maybe stuff that we have on the horizon looking forward. So we're going to get into all that next week. But this is more of just an open-ended conversation, I guess, single-sided conversation, talking to myself in a room. But we can go through the S1 Mark II, and we should probably start there. Just get the specs out of the way, because I know that's what a lot of people want first and foremost, even though they've seen it a million times already. Every video is going to tell you the specs. Every video is going to tell you the features. I've even got them playing on screen right now, so you can probably just see that already. But let's go over to B&H, because that's where they usually do the best breakdowns. Amazon is also a place you can buy this product. Adorama, there's plenty of places online you can find cameras and photography equipment. But B&H tends to have the kind of first product listing, the best, most robust list of all the specs and the things you care about. Amazon is kind of lacking in that regard, although I do tend to buy most things from Amazon just because they're open all the time, and B&H has the, the closures every now and again. But the S1 Mark II is a new full-frame camera from Lumix. If you know Lumix as Micro Four Thirds, well, you probably need to catch up to speed. Lumix has been doing full frame for quite a while now, actually. Since 2018, 2019, I think, is when those first Lumix full frame cameras launched. And obviously there's a lot of history and longevity with Micro Four Thirds, but now we're also talking about full frame as well. So the S1 Mark II is a full frame camera, and here you can see the key features. It's a 24 megapixel, partially stacked sensor. People have speculated that it's the same sensor that's in the Nikon Z6 Mark III. That's a camera that I've also shot with recently. I rented it to put together a somewhat of a review. You can check that out on the channel if you want. There's some things I like about that camera. There's some things I don't like. more or less comes down to personal preference and just the differences between Nikon and Lumix. Honestly, for me, Lumix feels the most comfortable, so I'm very excited for that type of technology to be in a Lumix camera body. I don't know if it's the identical same sensor. Maybe it's a similar sensor, optimized a certain way. I don't know, but people speculate that it's very similar to the Nikon Z6 Mark III. So being partially stacked, meaning you're going to get some faster read speeds from this type of sensor. One of the big recent controversies or dramas around Lumix was the S1R Mark II, a camera that was announced just 3 months ago, being a little slow on the read speed. So getting more of that rolling shutter jello and skew and the distortion that you don't like from a rolling shutter camera. Obviously, there are some global shutter cameras now in this kind of hybrid space, but they're few and far between. Almost everything is still CMOS rolling shutter sensors. The partially stacked sensor helps speed it up so that you're able to read the sensor faster and get less of that jello distortion. So the S1 Mark II should kind of be the response to that criticism that Lumix was getting with the S1R Mark II, but they are two very different cameras. The R is for resolution. You obviously get a lot more resolution with the S1R Mark II. 8K, huge, almost 50 megapixel photos, I think, if I'm going from memory there. The S1 Mark II, just the regular S1 Mark II, is a 24 megapixel. So, however you want to slice it. If you want to say that's half the megapixels, you can look at it that way. But this is still a 6K capable camera, and we're going to get into some of that features. One of them being the 5K, 5.1K. If you care about the 0.1s, I don't know who really does. Everyone says 5.1K, 5K. Let's just simplify. 5K, 60. Open gate. So this is kind of crazy because that 5K mode is uncropped, meaning it should be the full width or pretty close to it of the full sensor. Open gate, so you're not only are getting the full width, you're also getting the full height of the sensor at 60 frames a second. This is kind of unheard of. This is kind of a first for a full frame camera. Even the GH7, a micro four thirds camera, won't give you that full sensor open gate at 60 frames a second. You're dealing with a crop there. So that's one thing that really appeals to me. I love shooting open gate because of the benefits of shooting horizontal and vertical content at the same time. This is kind of catching on in the content creator space. A lot of influencers and YouTubers are figuring this out, and even on production teams. Now, granted, if you're shooting Canon or Sony or Nikon, you're probably not quite as familiar with this, but it is one of the huge advantages for Lumix that they still don't get enough credit for. Open gate is a huge deal, and the fact that you can now do 60 frames per second open gate uncropped, that's kind of wild to me, and something I'm very excited for. Now, is it truly uncropped? Is there, are we talking percentages? Like how much of a percentage? I don't actually know in terms of breaking it down. How much are we getting full width, truly full width? We'll have to see. But we've also got the great Lumix IBIS that they're known for, the image stabilization. That's another thing that I think Lumix is kind of undersold on, or they don't really get enough credit for how good their IBIS is. Everyone talks about how good the autofocus is for Sony cameras, and Sony cameras are hyped up for their autofocus. And yeah, the Lumix cameras now have phase detect autofocus. It's pretty good. Maybe it's not as good as Sony, but the IBIS is way better than the Sony cameras. And I don't think people often compare those equally, because there's a lot of times where you don't need or want autofocus, but you really want good IBIS. So weighing those things in comparison, I think would be maybe put Lumix in like a better category and not be talked down about how the autofocus has been so bad for so long. That was true. And once they finally fixed it, I think we're all glad and grateful. But some of the benefits of Lumix, open gate, IBIS, even something as simple as shutter angle, really get kind of put on the back burner and not talked about in the way that they should. Everyone can benefit from good IBIS. Everyone can benefit from open gate. So having that, I think, is a bigger selling point than people make it out to be. We've also got the high resolution mode, a lot of the other Lumix core features, but really the main selling point for me on the S1 Mark II is the idea of shooting higher frame rates uncropped from a full frame sensor. If you know Lumix and you know their full frame cameras, the S1, the S1H, the S1R, the S5, the S5 Mark II, the S9, all of them have great video features, but they've always been kind of crippled by this fact that all of their 60 frames per second modes were cropped in on that sensor. And if you're buying a full frame camera for the full frame benefits, it's always a shame to have to crop in just to shoot a higher frame rate. limitation of the technology, limitation of the sensor, but now it seems like they fixed that with this new sensor in the S1 Mark II. Now, that all sounds good on paper, but we can't ignore that price. $3,200 is expensive when you're comparing it to other things out there like the Nikon Z6 Mark III, which is much more affordable than this is. So I don't know how that shakes out, if it's literally the same sensor or not. I think that still remains to be seen, but certainly something that should give you pause or hesitation that there's other cameras on the market doing similar things, not identical, but similar things for a lower price point. However, it does seem like there's been a lot of effort put into the S1 Mark II from Lumix. And again, we can't forget the great IBIS and the open gate. So it's an exciting camera. It certainly has me intrigued, and it's something that's on my radar as much more a likely candidate for my purchase compared to the S1R Mark II, which really didn't come with, I don't know, there were trade-offs that I didn't want to make, and I don't necessarily need 8K, which I do think the S1R Mark II now has 8K via firmware update. So that's something to check out, or maybe that's coming very soon, but that's something I did see. So you can go down further on B&H and dive into the specs, dive into the highlights, dive into the marketing. You've probably already done that, to be honest, because I'm kind of late to the game on this. Again, I mentioned it's been a busy week for cameras. So the S1 Mark II, the S1 Mark IIe, which by all accounts looks to be very similar to the S5 Mark II, just in a slightly different body. But sensor, technology, all that stuff seems very similar to the S5 Mark II, although it is quite a bit more expensive than the S5 Mark II. So the S1 Mark IIe may not be for everyone. I'm not really sure who it's for. There is an uncropped 60 mode. Well, I shouldn't say it's uncropped. It's full width 60 on the S1 Mark IIe. Gosh, the names are really annoying at this point in time. S1II. Lots of letters, lots of numbers. Hopefully you can follow along. But that cheaper version of the S1II, the E designation, is not a pro thing like you might think with the X designation on something like the S5 Mark IIX, meaning it's more expensive and has better features. The E designation is that it's cheaper and has less features and a totally different sensor by all accounts. That will give you full width, 4K 60, but cropped 2.4 to 1. So more of that cinema scope aspect ratio, the letterboxing that you would get on a 16:9 television. Certainly valuable for movie making, but if you're a modern content creator trying to shoot vertical and horizontal at the same time, that's the opposite direction you want to go. So I think my personal recommendation, my initial reaction is go with the S1 Mark II. It seems to have the better sensor, better technology. There's a few reviews out there testing the dynamic range, testing the readout speeds, testing all these things. And by all accounts, it looks phenomenal. Now, the thing that I'm going to talk about, and you can probably guess it if you've been following the channel for a while, and that's overheating. The S1 Mark II seems like it doesn't overheat as much as the S1R Mark II. The other problem with the S1R Mark II, in addition to the jello rolling shutter, we also have overheating issues in those higher resolution modes. And there's some mitigation factors you can apply to the camera, things you can do with dummy batteries and unplugging HDMI and, jumping through all these hoops just to get the thing not to overheat. I don't want to deal with any of that. If I'm going to spend $3,000 on a camera, it better not overheat on me. Another reason I thought the S1R Mark II just wasn't for me. Maybe I'll pick it up at some point in the future if I need a dedicated high-resolution photography camera. I could certainly see the S1R Mark II fitting that need because it is L-mount, Lumix features, great, I love it, but really just high megapixel photos is what I would probably, use it for and rely on it for. So for me, maybe that's more like a rental. The S1 Mark II, the new camera, seems more in line with what I'd be looking for, which is a true hybrid, shoots great video, shoots photo. I don't need ultra high megapixels all the time, but 24 is decent. That's the problem I've had with the Sony cameras for so long, is that the good ones like the A7S Mark III and the FX3 are both low megapixels. So great for video if that's all you're doing, but if you also need a true hybrid that can take photos, you can probably look elsewhere, something like the Sony A7 IV, which is a decent camera, and I have access to a couple of them, but also not the camera for me because it overheats. So let's go back to the S1 Mark II from Lumix. People in their reviews have dabbled here and there on overheating, testing it, but no one that I've seen has really put it through the paces. And I don't know if this is a limitation of YouTubers just trying to check all the boxes, cover all the things, and overheating is lowest on their priority list because most of them just talk about the features, all the great stuff that it can do. But very few of them go to the lengths to test overheating. And even when they do, it's usually indoors and it's not for very long and it's just in a couple modes. And you're kind of left wondering, okay, how reliable is this thing? If you're out there and you're shooting weddings, you're shooting commercials, you're shooting documentaries, you're shooting anything, really, you're going to be in a variety of situations, a variety of environments, outside, inside. You're going to be shooting 5K 60, you're going to be shooting 4K 120, you're going to be shooting 4K 24, you're going to be shooting 6K 24. Bouncing around between all these different modes. Some takes, like if it's an interview or if it's a wedding ceremony or if it's some kind of presentation, that's going to be a long clip, an hour probably at least, maybe multiple hours of coverage that the camera needs to record for. But then you're also probably going to have to do B-roll in short bursts, clip by clip by clip, maybe 10 seconds at a time. This variety in coverage is normal for anyone who's doing video production, and yet it's usually not reflected in these pre-release reviews. It's usually, hey, I turned the camera on in a room somewhere and I let it record and it ran for this long. I'd like to see more real world hands-on experience with these things, and that just doesn't happen until they're out there in the real world. I don't know if I can put it on the YouTubers and the reviewers to actually put it through the paces that it needs to be, because it's just not a realistic request. Probably they're all busy doing other things. Even myself, I'm putting together this video in the limited time that I have to squeeze together a video in between other projects, work, personal life, everything going on. So I don't criticize the YouTubers too much, but I wish it was a little bit more transparent from Panasonic, from Lumix, what the thermal management is like in this camera, because unfortunately, it's become one of the most pressing needs that I have when I'm looking at evaluating a new product is this reliable? Is it consistent? Because I will say it again, the moment it overheats, it's just a brick. It's just a solid hunk of metal that can't do any of the things that it claims to, because it won't turn on. It's too hot. This plagues Canon and Sony and Nikon. I don't know what to agree with Nikon. I haven't tested all their cameras. And now it's starting to creep its way into these Lumix cameras. And I don't know what it is. If it's the market as a whole has just accepted it. Sony has gotten away with it for so long. These cameras that are hybrid, that can do all these great video things, great autofocus, this, that, and the other, and yet they overheat constantly, even in normal conditions. The A7 IV will overheat when I'm not even recording with it. It's just on. If I don't flip the screen out away from the camera body, it'll overheat. And I find that just completely unacceptable. The camera just being on gets too hot, that you have to open the LCD just to configure it right. No. There needs to be better thermal management built in. And I'm curious to see if on the Lumix S1 Mark II, they've actually factored this in. There are fans on it, so that's a good sign coming from Lumix compared to the G9 Mark II, which I don't think has any thermal venting exhaust ports on it at all. Very unfortunate there. People will say it's for weather sealing, yada, yada. I think there's some degree of weather sealing that is acceptable in consideration to proper thermal management for electronics. They just need to vent. Your computer, your laptop, your TV, they all have some kind of way to manage the amount of heat that they generate, because they do get quite hot depending on how big the display is, how fast the processors are, etc. You might say, these are photography cameras, and that's not a proper criticism or complaint, and I think that's foolish. I think you're living in the past if you think that these cameras are photography cameras. Since 2020, at least, almost every one of these new releases has been marketed as a hybrid, claiming some of the best, most cutting-edge video features. If you're going to keep falling back on the excuse that they're photography cameras, buy a real video camera. I don't know what you would point to. There's hardly any real video cameras left, and almost all of them don't fit my needs because none of them can take a photo. And if you're going to tell me, well, you need to buy 2 camera bodies with 2 sets of batteries and 2 sets of lenses and all that, that's just not realistic. That's not practical in 2025 when the needs of content move at the speed of your phone. influencers, content creators are shooting on their phone because it can take pictures, it can take video, it can do it reliably, and it can do it consistently. Your phone will overheat as well, but not in some of the same situations that these proper professional cameras do. These are much more expensive than a phone. And granted, the sensor is a lot larger. It's not apples to apples, but just to keep up with modern content demands, you need to have something that's single body that can do all of it and it can do it reliably. Something like a GH7, which has thermal management built in. In fact, it's one of the great claims for the Lumix marketing on the GH6 and the GH7 is that it won't overheat. It's got a really robust fan built into it. And you'll see that on the Lumix S1 Mark II, that's not part of the marketing. So it's not really criticized in the reviews, but it's also not pushed in the marketing that this thing won't overheat. So that's why it gives me a little bit of pause. People have said that it's better than the S1R Mark II, but I don't know if it's going to be able to hold up to what I need it to do. The other thing that I've noticed with this launch on the S1 Mark II is people have started talking about this new 24-60 f2.8 lens, which I think looks like a great lens. People have been referring to it as the new kit lens, but I haven't seen a kit for sale with that lens in it yet. And I think that's probably where I'm most interested in it. If it comes bundled with something like the S1 Mark II, if it actually lives up to the hype, if it can deliver all these great features in a body that doesn't overheat, I'd be really interested in that 24-60 lens as a kit lens to score a deal, to score a discount. Because right now, the S1 Mark II is quite expensive at $3,200. Factor in another $900 or so, I think, for that 24-60. And you're looking at a hefty price point, upwards of $4,000 US plus tax just to get a camera body and a lens, which is very expensive in modern times. There are more expensive cameras, certainly. There's more expensive lenses, certainly. But I will never say that $4,000 is cheap, because that's a little, I think, out of touch. There's people who will say that if it's for your business, if it's for your career and all that, it doesn't matter. And I think that's sort of true. Yes, there is a certain price at which it is acceptable for a business to function compared to just an enthusiast, a hobbyist. So maybe this isn't the camera for that level. But I also think there's a lot of people out there who want to buy multiple camera bodies. They need multiple lenses. They need multiples of these things. And they also want to invest in something that's going to last. It's going to have longevity. So if I'm dropping $4,000, $8,000, $12,000, that it's not going to be immediately replaced come 6 months, 9 months down the road when Lumix announces yet another new camera. Because let's not forget, there probably is an S1H Mark II in this roadmap, in this lineup. I can't see how there wouldn't be. They announced and they launched the S1, the S1R, and the S1H all the way back 6 or 7 years ago. And now it seems like they're doing the same thing. They're repeating it with some additional variants like the S1II. They've done some other things like the S5 Mark II, which launched pretty quickly after the initial S5. So that was a pretty quick follow-up with phase detect autofocus. And they threw in the X variant there. I can't imagine they would do an S1H Mark II and an S1H Mark II X, but hey, they certainly could if they really wanted to. They can do whatever they want, and it's getting to be kind of confusing from a consumer perspective. I think there's some clarity that they could provide on the product roadmap and simplifying and streamlining these things, but an S1H Mark II would be foolish not to make, so I think it is coming, but who knows when. Obviously, none of us know. Is it 3 months away, 6 months away, 9 months, 18 months? Who knows? The best thing I can recommend is buy the camera that you actually need. Don't just buy the camera you want and think is great. Buy it for a purpose, buy it for a need. The S1 Mark II does support the 32-bit float recording with the XLR 2 adapter, just like the S1R Mark II also supports that 32-bit float. So if you're looking for a full frame S L-mount camera that does 32-bit float and you need that, then maybe the S1 Mark II is the camera for you. Let's go back to the 24-60 f2.8 lens, because that's a lens that I think is just shy of being perfect. If it had been a 20-60 like we all wanted, and I don't know why they didn't do it, maybe it would have been too big or too heavy or too expensive, or they just thought it would not, people wouldn't buy it. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure all of us would have loved a 20-60 compared to a 24-60. Because when you're looking at 24-60, you're like, okay, but there's already a 24-70. Granted, the 24-60 is a lot smaller, it's a lot lighter, and it's a lot cheaper. So if optically it's as good as the 24-70, then great. Okay, it makes sense for the people who want to save a couple bucks and save on the size and the weight of their rig. But I think it'd be far more interesting had we got a 20-60 f2.8, because that actually separates it and gives it a completely different focal range to cover for people who want a little bit wider on the wide end. A lot of people, myself included, have talked about how 24-70 isn't quite wide enough. 24-60 doesn't solve that either. A 20-60 would. Now, Lumix does make a 20-60, but it's a variable aperture lens, and it's a rather slow lens, a 3.5 to 5.6, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, that's a fine lens, same size and weight, I think, as this new 24-60 2.8. So that's kind of impressive. Or maybe they're very similar. I don't know that they're identical, but they're very similar shape, form factor. They look aesthetically the same. The 20-60 might be lighter. In fact, I would probably guess it probably is, but again, I don't know exactly. So if you need that wider focal length, unfortunately, you have to sacrifice on the aperture. Whereas if you want the faster aperture, the 2.8 constant, you have to sacrifice the focal length on the wide end and start at 24. I don't know why they did that. I don't know how long this thing has been in development, but there's certainly a lot of us out there talking about a 20-60 being almost the perfect lens, just needing a faster aperture than that old kit lens. It remains to be seen if this new 24-60 f2.8 will be a new kit lens. I'm hoping, because if it comes bundled and it comes with a discount, then that's probably a great deal. Now, could Leica finally move a little bit and make some new lenses? I sure hope so, because I feel like they're asleep. Lumix is making all these great cameras and sort of, dripping out new lenses here and there. But Leica seems like they're just asleep. I don't know why they have the lenses they have for L-mount, why they're so expensive, and why they don't pick up the mantle and actually make some decent lenses for L-mount. The ones they have, I'm sure have fans out there, but they're so incredibly expensive and they don't offer anything new or interesting or unique. A lot of them are kind of useless, I think, especially at the price point. So I'm hopeful that they can figure whatever it is they need to figure out and make something worthwhile. That, yeah, it's Leica. It can be expensive. I'm not going to complain about the price too much, but I need the functionality, something like a 20-60 or shoot, even a 20-50, and make it fast. Make it like an f2. That would be awesome. A perfect complement to the Micro Four Thirds lens that I love, which is the 10-25 for Micro Four Thirds. That's a 1.7. If you can get us a full frame equivalent to that lens, I know it will sell like hotcakes as long as the price is reasonable, not $10,000, which I'm sure Leica would love to charge everyone. So if we can get a full frame version of that 10-25, meaning a 20-50 or around that range, that's got a decently fast aperture, something like a 2.8 or maybe even faster like f2, I think that would go a long way in making a lot of us happy compared to a 24-60 2.8, which, yes, serves a purpose. Yes, it's nice to have something small, compact, lightweight. All those things are great, but Sigma already has a 28-70 f2.8 that, do you want the wide end? Do you want the long end? 28-24, 60-70. Kind of pick whichever one you're going to get the most use out of. I have the 28-70, and it's a decent lens. I do like it. It's not quite as optically perfect as I'd like it to be, but it gets the job done, and it's small, lightweight, and affordable. So I think that's good, and I'm glad Lumix has something like that with the 24-60. So it is a lens that I probably will get eventually at some point in time, but again, looking for it in kind of a bundle version. Let's also talk about the DJI Mavic 4, because unfortunately, this is a drone that I don't know if I'll ever get my hands on. Right now, it's not available in the US. It's announced, it's launched to some degree, but I know hardly anything about it because in the United States, DJI isn't playing nice with the government right now, which is a whole can of worms of politics that we're not going to go into, but it is out there. If you live somewhere outside of the US, definitely check out the DJI Mavic 4. I don't even know the price. I imagine it's kind of insane. But the great thing about DJI that I'm excited about for the Mavic 4 is that they tend to release the expensive, premium, best-in-class version, and then a lot of those features, a lot of those things that you're after trickle down to the cheaper, more affordable drones. So if DJI ends up being able to play nice with the US and eventually we get these drones back kind of in stock and circulating in the United States, it's a good sign for the future and where things are headed, because the Mavic 4 does look really, really nice. But again, I'm not going to look too hard because I don't want to get my hopes up and I have some kind of crazy jealous envy of what y'all get in other countries and try and figure out how I can import it. No, I'm not going to go to those links right now. I'm just going to hold and be patient, and we're going to see where things head with that side of things. But it is announced, and there's footage out there, promotional videos you can check out for the Mavic 4 if that's something you're into. I'm much more interested in the Lumix S1 Mark II. Question you might be asking yourself is like, am I going to buy it? I really wanted to. I really, that pre-order button, but I don't know when it's coming out. And that's the thing. Without a release date, without that expectation, and with the track record that I know from living long enough and being through this process many times over, you really want to buy it. You really want to get on that pre-order list. But then reality kind of checks in and you realize, okay, well, when's it going to ship? Are we a month out? Are we 2 months out? Are we 3 months out? What else is coming on the horizon? Are we going to get an S1H Mark II? Is there going to be some kind of bundled discount with the S1II and this new 24-60 lens? Is there incentives coming up? Things like Black Friday, end of the year, Cyber Monday, promotion. Like, that's not that far away when you think about it. And I'm not telling you to wait. If you want the camera and you can afford it and you need it, go ahead and buy it. But for me, the timing's not quite right. There's nothing the S1 Mark II is offering that is that new or that much of a replacement compared to what I already have, which is the S5 Mark II, which goes to show you how much of a powerhouse that S5 Mark II is. It's no surprise that Lumix is they've doubled down on that sensor multiple times over, but also the form factor of the S5 Mark II and hyping up a lot of the features that made the S5 Mark II what it is. There's lots of people out there who shoot with the S5 Mark II, and it took me a while to catch on and realize how great of a camera it actually is. There's plenty of people who hate it as well. They bought the S5 Mark II and then they sold it because it was awful and they couldn't handle the rolling shutter or the whatever criticism they have. But I'll tell you, as someone who has it, shoots with it regularly, I love the S5 Mark II. I think it is the best value maybe almost ever for a camera. I've made plenty of videos talking about it, but I'll talk about it again. The S5 Mark II you can pick up right now used for less than $1,500 US, I think. Those prices do fluctuate depending on trade and all and stock and availability, all that stuff. The price goes up and down. I've seen it as low as $1,300 depending on where you're buying, maybe from eBay or Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. You may be able to get a great deal on a Lumix S5 Mark II, and it's an awesome camera. It may not be the perfect camera. It doesn't do everything I need. It's not the best camera. Certainly, if you compare it to other cameras, there are other cameras that do the job better, but there's no camera that does as much as the S5 Mark II does, as well as it does for the price point that it's at. It's an enormous value, and one of those things where anything new coming out is always going to be held, in comparison to the best of the past. The S5 Mark II still keeps up. It still plays ball. And the S1 Mark II does look like the better camera. Yes, we've got full width 60 open gate. That's crazy. Faster sensor, less rolling shutter, probably better dynamic range on the S1 Mark II, surprisingly, compared to the S5 Mark II. But is it worth double the price? That's maybe up for you to decide. If you're charging double the price, you might be thinking double the features, which is what I think a lot of people were hoping out of the S1R Mark II, being double the price. Okay, double the resolution, double the frame rate, double everything. And maybe that's not a realistic way to look at pricing these days. Things are getting more expensive across the board, around the globe. Everything is trending up in price. So unfortunately, looking back on the past and comparing what it costs now to what it used to cost is maybe not a fair comparison. Things are just getting more expensive in every industry. So I think the S1II is priced reasonably, but it also makes me really appreciate how great the S5 Mark II is and how great of a value that is still to this very day. If you're looking for a full frame Lumix camera and you're not quite sure, do you really need open gate? What's the IBIS like? Ooh, what's the L mount all about? The S5 Mark II is a great place to start. It's the perfect entry-level camera. It doesn't overheat. It does everything you would want for video. Yes, 4K 60 is cropped, but you can still use it. You can work around it. There's ways that it's not going to overheat on you to the point where these other cameras that are quote unquote better and you can't even use them because they get too hot. You film in bursts of 10 minutes or 30 minutes at a time. The S1 Mark II is certainly the better camera, but it's a lot more expensive, which means there's a lot more risk associated with buying it. Because then if you don't like it or you want to change your mind, whatever, selling it is a whole nuisance, and you're probably losing out if you're selling it used. So you got to make the right decision for yourself. For me, I'm going to wait a little bit on the S1 Mark II, but chances are I might end up picking one up, especially if it gets bundled with that 24 to 60. That combo could be absolutely perfect. However, it's still missing one critical feature that I'm going to say it because I have to say it, and it's the built-in NDs, electronic NDs, END. It is possible on mirrorless cameras. Is it possible in a hybrid? I don't know. Is the form factor too small? I don't know. I'm not an electrical engineer. I'm not a mechanical engineer. I don't know how to figure these things out, but I can certainly compare it to other cameras on the market, like the FX6, which does have an electronic ND in a mirrorless mount. The FX6 is a little bit bigger than a hybrid camera, but not by much. So I don't know the technical limitations there, if it's actually possible. The FX6 doesn't have IBIS, but then you look at something like the Burano, which has IBIS and the electronic ND. So with the right set of ingredients, maybe it's just terribly expensive. I don't know. But my dream camera would be a hybrid mirrorless camera with great IBIS and electronic ND built right in, because it's the one final thing. These ISO values are getting so high and these apertures are getting so fast, and half the time I'm outside in the sun, I need NDs all the time. And constantly having to fiddle with them on the front of the lens is really annoying, and it's a nightmare. And you would think, okay, we'll get an ND, filter thing for your mount, right? It's a mirrorless mount. You can adapt old DSLR lenses, right? EF mount, you got old Nikon lenses you can adapt. Yeah, but then you're losing all the great new features like the phase detect autofocus by relying on old legacy glass. There's still a place for it. It still works, but it's not as good as the native glass, which is all mirrorless. So there's not a lot of room in there to drop in NDs. I'm hoping something like an S1H Mark II can solve that problem finally. Maybe that's why it's taking so long. If Lumix plays their cards right and they make an S1H Mark II with electronic ND, plus all the other great features, IBIS, autofocus, good resolution, good performance, minimal rolling shutter, the true cinema hybrid camera, good for photography, good for video, good for everything, that will be the camera that I want to buy, even if it's more expensive than the S1 Mark II, because those features to me are worth it. Something like a $4,000 price point is certainly reasonable for an S1H Mark II. There's people who will tell you it should be even more than that, especially if you're comparing it to something like the Sony Burano, which is a whole lot more than $4,000. Different camera, different body style, different user, all that is, again, it's not apples to apples. It's just talking about what's out there on the market. The S1 Mark II looks like a great camera. All the reviews seem to say that it is some of the best. It is probably the best that Lumix has ever made. But I think we're all still wondering, is there something even better on the horizon in the near future? I don't think I would be upset with an S1 Mark II, but I think I would be more happy with an S1H Mark II. I don't know if that makes sense. Probably sending maybe a little bit of mixed messages there. The S1 Mark II looks awesome. It looks great. It looks perfect for everything that's built in. I do have some questions about overheating, and maybe there's some other gotchas there, like it has Bluetooth time code, but in their marketing, they talk about it working with the Atomos UltraSync Blue. Well, I use Tentacle Sync, which seems to be a different platform. Will the Lumix S1 Mark II work with Tentacle Sync Bluetooth as well as Atomos UltraSync Blue? that remains to be seen, and something I hope can be addressed in firmware, because I love the idea of Bluetooth timecode and not having dongles or devices hanging off the camera, something plugged into the mic input or into the flash sync port. I don't want to deal with any of that. I love the idea of Bluetooth timecode, but it also needs to play nice with the system that I have, because unfortunately I don't have the Atomos UltraSync Blue, and I don't want to have to go invest in that and get that configured with all my cameras. The Tentacle Sync stuff works great, and if you haven't played around with timecode, it's certainly something I would recommend. Tentacle Sync, those devices are awesome. They have scratch audio built right in, so even if you're using the mic input, you still have some audio reference, but it is sending you audio timecode. The app works flawlessly. It's super easy to get everything in sync. It is kind of one of the interesting things these days. If you're editing in Premiere anyway, Premiere doesn't have a really good way to sync everything. We used to, back in the day, use Pluralize for audio syncing, and it would take forever, and it still kind of works if you have an old code from forever ago, but it's kind of not really supported as well as it once was, and it's just slow and tedious, and it's never all that perfect. The best way to do it is with timecode, but you need the devices to do it, and you need the cameras that can support it, which is most cameras nowadays. As long as it has a mic input, you can get timecode to it. But if you're running timecode in your mic input, then where do you run your actual microphone? That's another consideration to factor in. If the S1 Mark II has Bluetooth timecode and it actually can pair nicely with Tentacle Sync, that's a great sign for the future and where things are headed with Lumix, because I love that idea. I want more reliable timecode solutions across all my cameras and audio and everything being in sync with the click of a button. Awesome, and I love it. But I do need to make sure that it actually works nicely. So there's my question about Bluetooth timecode, my question about overheating, my question about the release date. When's this thing even coming out? The S1 Mark II, it's coming soon, according to B&H, but how soon is soon? I don't know. You don't know. I haven't heard anyone really say when the expected release date is going to be. Compare that to the S1R Mark II, which I'm pretty sure had a release date. I believe it was mid-March, and then it got pushed to late March, if memory serves correctly. But the S1 Mark II, they're not saying just yet. Maybe by the time this video is out, or maybe by as early as next week, we'll have definitive dates. If so, I'll follow up. Like I said, there's a lot more to discuss with the S1 Mark II. Plenty of people have put out reviews with information or criticisms that I think aren't quite fair or quite given the right perspective or context, let's say. So I do want to make some follow-ups talking about the S1 Mark II, how it compares even more so to the S5 Mark II. I talked about that a little bit here, but even to something like the Lumix GH7, because if you look at Micro Four Thirds, that's like the S1 Mark II version in Micro Four Thirds. So there's a lot to be said about the GH7, another camera that's severely underrated, criminally underrated, I might say. It just doesn't have the same enthusiasm because it's not full frame. And I think that's what it's really comes down to. Autofocus, 32-bit float, like all these crazy video modes, thermal management, flip screens, like it's got everything. And yet no one really talks about the GH7 anymore. So I want to talk more about that compared to the S1 Mark II, as well as future predictions for this S1H Mark II, because I think everyone is chomping at the bit for that camera to finally show its face. Like, let's get it out there. Let's see what it is. And really, I'll wrap it up here with perspective, because that's what I have now on the S1R Mark II. Now that the S1II and the S1IIe have been announced, it gives a little bit more perspective to where the S1R Mark II fits in place. I think Lumix and Panasonic, whoever calls the shots over there in their marketing department, might want to rethink their strategy a little bit, because when you release products this way, releasing them one at a time, in isolation, standalone, without the perspective of everything else kind of in its same category, in its same bracket, because again, these are all called the S1. That is the model of this camera body and kind of this lineup. The S1 is the core. So we have the S1II, the S1IIe, and the S1R Mark II. All of them are the S1. Seeing that perspective allows customers to decide, okay, which one am I actually needing? Which one serves the purpose that I'm trying to fulfill compared to just looking at the S1R Mark II on its own. You might sell more cameras in the short term that way, but I think in the long term, you end up rubbing people the wrong way and giving people buyer's remorse or hesitation when you say, here's the S1R Mark II, and that's all you have to look at. People are going to call out the rolling shutter, the jello, the skew. They're going to call out the overheating because you're marketing it on its own in isolation with nothing else to compare it to. So yeah, it has nice features like 8K, but you're also looking at the jello and the overheating going, well, okay, but I'm not going to pick 8K and deal with these other things. I'm just going to avoid it altogether. Well, now that we have the S1 Mark II and we say, okay, this one is built for speed. This one doesn't have the jello. This one doesn't have the rolling shutter problems. It may not overheat as much, or maybe it's super reliable like the S5 Mark II. Again, I don't know. I really have to kind of put it through the paces, put it through my trials, because it seems like the reviewers don't really do it, enough to what I find to be the standard. If you find someone out there reviewing the S1 Mark II, testing overheating thoroughly, please leave a link in the comments. I would love to check it out. I only ever see like a handful of these reviews because at a certain point, you're kind of sick of hearing the same marketing, the same features. Okay, I get it. I know what it does. Yes, yes, yes. What are you offering that's new or different and unique in terms of your perspective? What are you adding beyond what's on B&H? That's usually what I want to know. And overheating is one of those things that I think is not talked about enough, not tested enough. So if you do know someone out there who's done it, please leave a link in the description. I'd love to check it out. I'm sure other people would too. But now that we have the S1 Mark II and the S1 Mark IIe in perspective compared to the S1R Mark II, we can start to see, okay, here's how these things add up. Do you need the resolution and you want to deal with the rolling shutter and the overheating? Okay, you can prefer resolution. That's fine for the S1R Mark II. But now you have this other option, the S1 Mark II, that's a little bit different, but also a little bit the same. I think we need that same thing for the S1H Mark II. We really need to see what that is, what the price point is, what the features are, to actually compare them against each other adequately. Because in that kind of fog of war, fog of battle, not knowing what's ahead, in hindsight, it's super easy to make these decisions. When you have that clear perspective, you know everything, you know all the features, you can compare them to each other, much easier to make decisions. When you're trying to forecast, look at the future, uncertain. Okay, this one does this one does this, but there maybe is this other thing. Who knows? Is there an S5 Mark III coming out at some point in time? Of course, there's always new stuff coming out. But I think everyone really wants that perspective of the S1H Mark II to contrast with the S1 lineup. But also, I think I feel a little bit more favorably towards something like the S1R Mark II, now knowing that the S1II is an option as well. Maybe that's unfair, but I also think it's just the nature of putting a product out there that does some things really well and does other things not as well. If you have nothing to compare it to, no other option, no other alternative, it's going to receive criticism and maybe more than is deserved, but also we only know what we know. We can only talk about what's out there. So now that we can talk about the S1II and the S1R Mark II, we can actually compare them a little bit better, I think, with a little bit more clarity. And I think that'll be even better in the future if or when we do get an S1H Mark II. So I'll leave it there. I think the S1 Mark II is certainly more of my type of camera, my style of camera. It checks a lot of my boxes. It does almost everything right on paper, on a review from a distance. I'm excited to get my hands on it eventually. When it finally comes out, again, we don't know. But once it's out there, having it as a rental, giving it a try, putting it through the paces, filming outside for extended periods of time. Is it going to overheat? How can I get the Bluetooth side of things working? Those are some of the last final few pieces of the puzzle to see if this is truly the camera that I would actually want, or am I better off just sticking with the S5 Mark II? I see a scenario where the S5 Mark II and the S1 Mark II both fit nicely in my kit, but then that doesn't leave much room for an S1H Mark II, which may be the camera that I'm truly after. But again, I won't know that till it's out, till we have more firm details. Something with an electronic ND would be my instant. Granted, if everything else is more or less what we've seen, no severe compromises, no terrible thermal management, right? I also imagine the S1H Mark II will finally be the Lumix full frame camera that they hype up, that this won't overheat. I imagine that's what they would do. That would be a good differentiator for the S1H Mark II. So maybe the S1R Mark II and the S1II overheating in comparison to an S1H Mark II that doesn't overheat also gives you more perspective, more context, more awareness about what's really going to meet your needs. Because there's a lot of people who don't need the same things that I need, but I do need the reliability, the consistency of being able to shoot with the camera all day in reasonable environments. I'll leave it at that. I'm not filming on the surface of the sun. I'm not shooting volcanoes. It's just generally outside, but outside gets warm, 100 degrees Fahrenheit and up. A lot of cameras can't withstand that kind of pressure these days. So the ones that do, and they do everything else fairly well, something like the S5 Mark II or the GH7, those immediately get my stamp of approval. Awesome, awesome cameras that I can't recommend enough, especially because they also offer immense value for their price point. Again, I'm not saying they're the best cameras ever made. I'm not saying they're superior in terms of technology, but I'm saying that they get the job done, they do it well, and they offer a ton of value. The S1 Mark II, I don't know that I can say that just yet. Even something like the S1H Mark II, again, if or when it comes, if it's too expensive, it's not going to have the same value proposition. Maybe it'll serve my needs, but maybe it'll come at a price point that's too high for me to recommend generally to other people because it's just too much money. Maybe you're better off saving a little bit with something like the S5 Mark II and just dealing with some of the limitations of that camera, which aren't many, honestly. The S5 Mark II is a great camera, one I would happily recommend to anyone interested in this type of production. So I'll end it there. Hopefully this was long enough, scratched the itch. It's taken me time to put this together because, again, it's been a crazy busy week. But I did want to put my thoughts out there on camera because I know there's people who are always curious. They always want something new perspective, and now you have mine.